Okay, I want to welcome you all to EDTALKS, the Charted Waters panel, the $20 billion innovation. You're going to find out all about why it's a $20 billion innovation. Is it really $20 billion? What's the net gain? What exactly is happening in the big laboratory called charter schools? Why it's important particularly to the ed tech sectors, the business sector, the investors in the room, and the occasional policy wonk. I'm Jeannie Allen. I'm your moderator. I'm president of the Center for Education Reform. And with us today is, going from my left all the way down, April Goebel from KIPP Create in Chicago, Jonathan Hage, CEO of Charter Schools USA, Marcia Aaron from KIPP LA, and Beth Purvis from Chicago International School. And what I want to do is really have a conversation with them and bring you guys into it. I've asked them to each give a couple of minutes about what makes what they're doing in the charter world innovative. But let me just start by giving you just some context for those of you who don't have it completely in your head, since it's something we do every day at the center. About 6,200 charter schools across the country, right? We have 42 states and the District of Columbia with charter school laws, but those 6,200 or so charter schools across the US are actually clustered in really about 30 states for the most part, with just a handful in the rest. They tend to be clustered in states that have strong charter school laws. Those are laws that actually allow for some diversity and innovation in terms of authorizing, as well as much less regulation in terms of when you operate. Not less accountability necessarily, but a lot more flexibility to operate, a lot more equity. So when you tend to see healthy charter school climates, you tend to see more money that approximates 100%, even though we're still far from it. Flexibility from most rules and regulations governing other public schools, except for health, safety, discrimination, performance, et cetera. And usually a number of entities that are in the authorizing business. That's not always the case. I'm sure everyone here would say we need gobs more money, we need lots more flexibility, but that's sort of the condition. Almost 2.5 million kids in charter schools. Roughly 1 million, we estimate, more could fill more charter schools if they were open, that actually sit on waiting lists or at one time expressed interest. A little over 5 million adults, we estimate, are involved in. If you take 1.5 parents per child in a charter, if you will, add up the adults, the average school board's numbers. And so you're talking about an idea that while a lot of people feel like it's saturating us, it's already saturated, it's far from saturated. It's far from saturating communities. It's far from saturation point in terms of demand, and in fact in terms of investment. And so what we like to say, people will say to me, oh, well, we at the center endorse a lot of reforms that deal with choice and accountability. People are always like, well, Jeannie, charter schools, I mean, it's all about charter schools. Isn't there something else out there? And what I like to tell people is actually charter schools are just the name of this concept that actually makes it permissible to do effective schooling. And it's what you do and whether you have the flexibility to actually create a school that actually addresses kids' needs in wholly different ways, or maybe traditionally in ways that we all thought schools were once doing it, that don't look so innovative, but maybe they're innovative for the very fact that they're actually doing something that they were set out to do and succeeding at it. So I'd argue innovation isn't just about the computer or the iPad or the way we're teaching kids, whether it's face-to-face, synchronistic, asynchronistic, or all the other buzzwords out there. It's also about whether we're doing well what education was set out to do. And education should be a 24/7 innovation enterprise where we're constantly learning and thinking about how to actually address the child and have adults interface and learn new things. So just as we're learning about the brain every day in kids, we're learning about different methods and modes of operating. And what's one of the most exciting things is when we look at this landscape, and something that's not talked about nearly enough, and I'm so excited these folks are here to talk about this, is what's really going on in those schools. It's not just that they fought to set up a school, and now they have a school, and it's a charter, and they're a little separate, and sometimes a lot separate from the traditional public school system. It's that actually on a daily basis, they have to think and rethink what they're doing because they're on such a firm performance contract. They're under a microscope like no other set of accountability mechanisms, not in any other school system. And the money's coming right in their door, and they have to account for it. And it has to be transparent if it's going to work. Those who aren't, do close. We have about a 15% closure rate in this country. So anybody out there who thinks that, jury's still out, it's not like, some are good, some are bad, actually, that's bunk. The facts show 15% of schools closed. Most of them closed for financial, academic reasons. Many years before, the biggest problems rear their ugly heads. So you know you have a system working when, in fact, this charter school closure rate is very comparable to the small business closure rate. Those businesses that people don't show up at in 2 or 3 years down the line, they're suddenly closed. Same thing's happening in the charter world. Perhaps the most exciting thing that applies to so many of you in this room is just the advent and the ability of online and digital learning modalities to be introduced in charters without lots of rigmarole, without lots of rules and regulations, and frankly, both because necessity is the mother of invention, because these schools have had to do a lot of things to figure out how to make ends meet with less money and also with a clock and it running and ticking on them to demonstrate how to do things well and better and how to be models. So with that, I'm going to turn to April, ask you to tell us why KIPP Create is in fact so unique. Is it unique? Is it just like any other school around the country dealing with technology in the classroom? And how is it working for kids who are in a pretty disadvantaged environment?
Sure. So I'm April, and I work with the KIPP schools in Chicago, so not just KIPP Create, but we're part of a national network of 125 KIPP schools serving 41,000 students. And I think what's unique about KIPP Create, we sort of followed on the heels of, Marsha's going to talk a little bit about the schools in LA, but they opened up an elementary school in LA that was focused on blended learning. And we opened up a middle school in Chicago that was one of the first blended learning campuses in KIPP. And we were really excited about it because for the 2 years previous to us opening, we opened last fall. We did a lot of research and spent a lot of time visiting schools across the country, and our principal spent a year creating her design plan for what she wanted KIPP Create to look like. And so KIPP Create, we just have one grade of 5th grade, and then we'll grow up each year. But it's really interesting because at our other campuses, we had a lot of small pilots happening, and our teachers were really interested in integrating technology into the model. But at Create, it's really sort of the backbone of our school. So it looks like everything from our reading classroom having really smart, differentiated instruction because our students are able to rotate through different learning stations and centers. And in our math classroom, they're integrating technology in a very different way where it might be their exit tickets are used on the iPads or their the visuals in the classroom are leveraging technology. So at KIPP Create, there's an hour a day, it's a power hour where our students are able to get small group differentiated instruction. So I think the personalized learning that's coming out of KIPP Create is something we're really excited about.
That's awesome. So John, talk a little bit about personalized learning at Charter Schools USA. I mean, obviously, you're in a number of states. You've also recently come to Chicago. You've looked at a lot of the models like KIPP around the country. What's the big, innovator for you guys?
So I would start with the macro issue, which is we look at ourselves as a private-public partnership model where there's a role for the public enterprise, the private enterprise system, in our case being a proprietary operator of charter schools, and the nonprofit model. And that actually innovates around the kind of structures that we actually run these schools under. So we run schools for municipalities. We run schools actually even for school districts and for even states. Some of those schools, most of the schools are called charter schools, but some are called turnaround, some are even called takeover. They come in different forms and shapes, but at the end of the day, they have a common mission, which is to drive achievement at the highest accelerated way within an individualized instructional model. We did a lot of things to try to sort of differentiate and drive those outcomes. One is we built our own internal software systems, and then we still partner with outside folks when it comes to content, when it comes to the larger sort of SIS systems. But we found that we knew exactly what we needed, and the best way to do that was just to build our own certain components, especially around the individualized learning plans for students. We also learned that K-12 systems really work, and that we need to build K-8 systems before we do 9-12. So we put 3, sometimes 4 K-8s together before we build a high school, and we drive those systems from kindergarten up, so we can keep kids on grade level and really drive the entire model around a community standard that everybody sort of buys into over time. And they recognize keeping those siblings together, having those parents involved, really changes the dynamic in the community. And we're, lastly, very long-term players. We see this under a very sort of strategic level of charters might not be the sexiest thing because they're not brand new anymore, but actually the innovation going on within charters is actually very, very good cutting-edge stuff, and you only get the one bad apple that takes the paper, the front page, but there's a lot of really strong innovation going on within these systems because, quite frankly, they can innovate and create outcomes and measure much quicker and change on the dime what's happening in the classroom, unlike a school system, which could take years for those kinds of changes to happen. So ultimately, we're a little bit of a research laboratory. In fact, we're a lot that way. We think of ourselves that way, and we're comparing and contrasting what's working, what's not, and constantly taking the best and replicating it quickly, and that doesn't work, killing it off, and then moving forward.
So as April said, Marcia, your school at KIPP LA has been kind of the forefront for the KIPP network of blended learning models, and I wonder if you tell us a little bit about kind of how that all came to be. Can you also talk a little bit about, for this group, how you decided what you were going to buy, how you decide what you're going to bring in, how you evaluated the tools and technology out there to make decisions about it, or did you create your own?
So we actually have 7 schools in Los Angeles. We're K-8. 2 of our schools are fully blended, so KIPP Empower Academy and KIPP Comienza, and we'll be opening 2 blended schools this summer. So KIPP Empower Academy, when our school leaders signed on, and they signed on about a year and a half before they opened the schools, that was pre the budget crisis in California. By the time Mike Kerr, who had operated in New York City, arrived in Los Angeles, his funding was down about 20% per pupil. Now, that doesn't mean that we, cut him a break and said, we expect you to do 20% less for your kids. And so that budget crisis really led Mike, who'd operated in a New York environment, moving to LA with half the funding, to have to be creative on how he would provide differentiated instruction for his students. He went to larger class sizes, but wanted small group instruction, and technology was really the tool for that. So he opened his school with 1 grade level as a fully blended school, the first in KIPP. Mike spent a year, just like April's school leader, designing his school, and we hooked up with Education Elements and with Michael Horn and evaluated the different technology out there, and we've changed technology along the way. So we started with iStation, and we left iStation, we came back to iStation. We've started with a different math program than we're using now. We're using Dreambox, but we're really moving towards ST Math. So we're very fluid in trying to find the right product. A couple things when we think about technology in the classroom. One is we're really trying to drive towards the lowest cost device because devices are expensive. So as we think about, early on we used Dell computers, but we're really moving towards Chromebooks because their landed cost is $338 as opposed to Dell, which is cheaper than Macs. But not only is the landed cost very inexpensive, but the service required to support those machines is virtually non-existent. So that's been really vital to us to make sure all the software is in the cloud and easy to administer for our team. We do have a LMS, so we use Education Elements to run that because we are kindergarten, and most of our kindergartners come in, and I heard somebody this morning saying, kindergartners in the low-income communities are 18 months behind, and we absolutely see that. So most come in with no number or letter sense. We need an easy way for them to come in the front door. When we do our middle school, we won't use that kind of front door. We can actually do that through Google and have a consolidation, but we don't need a really strong, easy way for them to come in because a 10-year-old is much better at remembering passwords, et cetera.
So I want to come back to all of you with this question, but Beth, as you start talking about Chicago International School and your portfolio, really, is schools, which are a hybrid of for-profit, nonprofits, et cetera, I also want you to tell us a little bit about, since you've been in Chicago probably the longest and doing this from a political standpoint, you've seen the belly of the beast and you're still there. But tell us a little bit about how you square with this for-profit, nonprofit issue, and also the whole issue of technology in the inner city, because we're supposed to be told that a lot of kids can't really learn by online learning, and we need a million adults standing right in front of them. And how do you deal with that in that environment?
Well, I think one of the things that's important about charter schools, I've been in public education for 25 years, the last 10 years with Chicago International Charter School, which means I'm on my 5th CEO of the Chicago Public Schools. One of the esteemed members of that group is here today. So if you really want to know about Chicago, Jean-Claude can share that with you. And the 9th head of the Office of Charter Schools in the 10 years that I've been there. So the turnover in public schools is a little crazy, especially in large public schools. So I think here are some reasons for charter schools is about urgency. So I want to be very clear that an African-American boy in middle school in Chicago has a better chance of going to jail than graduating from a 4-year college or university. Those are not my numbers, that's the University of Chicago. So we need to start with that sense of urgency. That's not okay. End of story. So I think charter schools, part of what we're trying to do is be very urgent about solving the problem. Because if we don't, we are going to have even more massive problems in this country than we currently have. What I think CICS brings to the table are a couple of things. The first is we started like most charter schools in that a board hired a school management organization and to run the charter schools, well-meaning board. What was different about my board is 2 years in, they realized it was a mess. So they fired that organization and said to themselves, what should we do differently? What have we learned? And what they learned is that no one has the answer. If everybody had the answer in education, we wouldn't be needed. So we moved to a true portfolio model. So currently, we have 16 schools serving 9,200 students. 15 of those schools are in Chicago, and 1 is in Rockford, Illinois. And what's important about what we do is that our schools are in, like the schools here, they're in high-crime, low-income neighborhoods primarily, and they afford choice for parents. For us, what I think we bring to the table is this idea of a portfolio management. I have 5 different school management operations that actually run the day-to-day operations of our school. John is our newest partner with Charter Schools USA, and they each have a very different model. We have for-profit and nonprofit. I don't care. We have contracts that actually cap the amount that can go back to the mothership, so whether your mothership is for-profit or nonprofit. And to be candid, in Chicago, if you can figure out a way to make a profit, I applaud you. Because on our per pupil, we can't. So to me, the whole for-profit, nonprofit is actually a ridiculous argument. The conversation should be which companies have can have the greatest outcome for kids. In terms of technology, just to build on what my colleagues are saying, I think what we are able to do is incubate ideas, make decisions very quickly, implement quickly, and then kill the ideas off quickly if they don't work well. And we can do that without a lot of with a lot of layers. Even things like R&D. So I was a college professor before I was here, and it's easier to do research in CICS charter schools, which have the same demographic population as CPS, because you know who the IRB committee is? Me. So you don't need to go through multiple layers. So I think for charter schools, for us, we have a portfolio group, and I'm going to say one other thing is that we also help get around the word that I haven't heard a lot here, but is in many ways the monopoly that the unions have on running schools. And we are able, now 3 of my schools are union, 13 are not. The 3 are union are doing quite well, but they are not the mainstream Chicago union. And actually, the step and lane at those schools is aligned with student performance and teacher performance on the Charlotte Danielson framework. So there is a step and lane, but it is attached to something very different. So I think these are some of the things that we're able to do in charter schools that are very difficult to do in a large district.
It's a great point. And Marcia, I'm wondering what you think of how you would answer. This is a question that Deborah threw out that I thought was a great one too, which is whether charters can really scale to be a really big ed tech buyer. I mean, a lot of people here, whether small or large companies, they're selling to districts because those are the big guys, right? You're selling to states. And charters are still going to be comparably small. So can they be scaled to that point? Are you a place for them to look for, kind of a landing point to test out their products since you're so willing to move and shift?
Well, We are obviously smaller. I think when we look at KIP, and we're starting to actually aggregate our demand at KIP, so you think about 125 schools, and next year will probably be, 140 schools. We start to be able to aggregate some demand, right? 41,000 students, we're now the size of New Orleans. So we're a reasonable size school district now if you take KIP in aggregate. Now you have to understand KIP is a philosophy and not a model, so there's a lot of variation within KIP. I love it when people say, oh, I love your model, because we actually don't have a model. It's all about a belief system that drives the work that we do. I do think that, look, we're always going to be small, but I think we're a great testing ground. So, we're willing, April, I think, was one of the first ones to embrace eSpark. We were the first customer of EdElements. So we're willing to try new things, and because we're so intimately involved in our schools, we can make real-time decisions, and we're not afraid to make mistakes. We have a philosophy within KIP LA, which I imagine is probably shared among our colleagues, which as long as no children is harmed, we can fix any mistake. It's easy, we're small, we're nimble, and we're great at problem solving. So I feel like, let's try something, let's see if it works. We can roll it out, not roll it out. And quite frankly, all of our schools are different in LA, just as they are across the network. So it might work. What might work in East LA might not actually resonate in South LA, and we're okay with that. I do think it's hard for us. Look, I operate within the second largest school district. I mean, LAUSD is going to always have a bigger check than we have, no matter even if we grow at 30% a year for 20 years.
Yeah, but it's likely you're going to have better stories written about your achievements. So if you're a company, would you rather have your stuff demonstrating achievement in a very clear model, or kind of getting lost in the shuffle in a large city school district, right? So there's a...
And I think, often we like to be a strategic partner, right? So working very closely with, we worked very closely with EdElements early on, or working very closely with our SIS system right now, Illuminate, or, April with eSpark. We can be a really great partner for somebody because we can provide, much better feedback and input.
So John, how do you feel about that? So if KIP is sort of the equivalent of a New Orleans, what district are you most like in terms of size, and maybe even in terms of scope, since you're also now spread out beyond Florida and a handful more states?
Yeah, so we're experiencing enormous growth right now. It was planned growth. We took a hiatus on growth for 2 years, about 3 years ago. And for 2 years, we went through and built processes and systems like any top Fortune 500 company would do. We became SACS accredited as a school district, so that every school and every that we open up is accredited from the start. And we built the strategic plan in such a way where the growth was built to stretch and build academic excellence and scale, not because of the sake of growth. Growth for the sake of growth is not the purpose. The purpose is to drive opportunity for more students, and we had huge waiting lists. We still have waiting lists up to 20,000+ students. So what we have found is that the growth level we're at today, we opened 18 schools, including a virtual school last year, and this year we're on course for another 13 and another probably half dozen takeovers, turnarounds. So we feel like that's a large number traditionally in the history of charter movement, but not necessarily given where I think the movement should and will go, and that is to start bringing scale to the model in a high-quality way. Our size, we'll be at just around 52,000 students in August, and our goal is to reach about 100,000 students in the next 3 years. We think that's doable because, quite frankly, of the investment made on building the sort of time-tested tools, processes, and people in any great organization that's relevant to this space. Anyone who thinks that just the mission vision alone will get you there, there's a lot of great charter schools that got shut down by people with really great intentions, and it's sort of heartbreaking, right? But the truth is they probably shouldn't have been running a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and they never saw it that way. So we kind of think of ourselves as half-brained and being business acumen, and the other half-brain being in academic excellence, and driving those together in such a way where the student achievement numbers perpetuate the growth, not the growth for the sake of growth. Some of our own competitors, I think, have found that that hasn't worked, And we really want to be that one that has to turn down 3 or 4 or 5 opportunities for the one that we take, so that when we do take it, it's a commitment with every layer of the community and the partners and the parents and us to achieve excellent results. And that's what I'm excited about for the next 5 years, what we're growing.
So is there any direct correlation, before I leave you, and I want April, you to answer the same thing, any direct correlation between being for-profit and having innovation? Like, why were you for-profit? Why are you nonprofit? What does it matter? And I mean, Beth says it doesn't matter, but it seems to matter to a lot of people out there. There's still lots of really bad things written about them. There's still lots of attention. But does it help you do what you need to do is the question, and how?
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to do what we do if we weren't for-profit. Now, that doesn't mean there's not great nonprofits and there's not poor-performing nonprofits. Doesn't mean there's not some great for-profits and poor-performing for-profits. But we started as a nonprofit, actually, and we found that we were spending too much time raising money and not enough time innovating. And we really felt like we needed an investment model which could actually drive performance, and that performance would drive growth, and then that growth would drive investment back into more growth. And that has, I think, worked because of the long-term focus, though. I have to be honest about it, because there's a lot of folks who are looking at this space from the for-profit side, but if they don't have that sort of what I call do good first, and then the do well won't come later. So we really are student-centered, but we believe that the model has to innovate and invest and drive efficiencies, just like the model does in any other great for-profit company. We probably wouldn't buy our technology from a nonprofit producer of computers in this country today. No one actually even produces computers that are nonprofit. And there's a reason, because they're not able to actually drive the efficiency and the outcomes that people want in a technology platform. So there's really good innovation around the nonprofit, for-profit side. When you partner with nonprofits, they want to see the innovation, but they also want to see the investment. But they also need to be able to hold for-profits accountable, and when they don't do the job, they need to be able to terminate and hold them accountable.
How about you guys, April? Do you ever talk about this or think about it in a different way? And
Well, to be honest, when I saw the question that you sent out, I actually asked a few people about this one because I'm only familiar with nonprofit, so it's hard for me to speak about the for-profit sector. But I think to Beth's point, I think it ultimately probably doesn't matter. And I think, a few years ago, I'm a teacher at heart and then was a principal. So I think before I became an executive director, I used to have an opinion about for-profit being a question around leaders making decisions for a profit and not keeping their eye on kids and sort of the risk that's associated with that. I think where I am today, it's more about the leaders and the leadership, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit. So I think it comes back to sort of Beth's point that it really doesn't matter, but I'm not an expert in this.
But that's interesting. I want to hear you talk a little bit more about that, because I think that may be driving some of the acrimony is that among educators, that it's not intentional, but there is somehow this initial concern and view that if you have a tax-paying company versus, there is a profit motive, that they can't care about kids. Talk a little bit more about where you think that comes from and why, because that might be really helpful to, I think, people.
I mean, I think if you're driven to make a profit versus driven to, support kids and help them make it to and through college, I think that's where the feeling for me used to come from. But I think you can have a strong leader that's for profit, that's going to put the kids in the center first. So I think in the end, it doesn't matter. But if you would have asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have had a very different opinion, I think.
What do we do about that, Beth? I mean, there's still a lot of educators who haven't had the experience of sort of getting out of a traditional school, going to reform, where clearly that's something that April now can speak from a perspective of knowing a bunch of different players are out there, right?
Well, I think some of this stems from the fact that we don't do a great job, and I taught at a university that trained teachers. I went to 3 different universities for different parts of my degrees to get it. We don't teach teachers about the business side of education. And we don't teach teachers about how important that is, which is one of the reasons Chicago Public Schools has a $1 billion deficit. That we're not, and so I think we have to think about this from the time we're training teachers about how to think about the business side about this, because it's not a bad thing. As a parent, I pay attention to my budget, and my profit as a family is my college fund, for my kids. So I think we need to start changing the way we're helping teachers look about the financial decisions and the viability decisions around education. And even things like, I remember my first year teaching, my principal walked into my room, it's like, we need to spend $30,000 by the end of the year. Now, this was in 1987. There was a ton of money. I was a preschool special ed teacher. I was like, I don't know how much chalk I can buy. and it was because if we didn't spend it, we would lose it. And we wouldn't want it to go back. And I think about it now, I'm like, why wouldn't we want it to go back? I didn't need it. And we ended up buying things for my classroom that I used 3 years later rather than, so I think we have an endemic problem in education that we think that paying attention to the numbers means you don't care about the kids. And my argument would be, it means you care deeply about the kids because you're planning not just for now, but for the future.
Great point.
What do you think about that, Marcia?
Well, so I'm on two minds. I spent 17 years as a sell-side research analyst on Wall Street. I actually was in this hotel when I worked for the short time that Bankers Trust owned my company before they were brokered over to Deutsche Bank. So I'm of two minds. I think if you have a long-range outlook, then the for-profit can work. I worry if it's a public and you're beholden to the quarterly shareholder reports, because, you know, my opinion, but most people on Wall Street don't invest, they buy and sell. And that makes companies and leaders make decisions that are based on what's in the leader's best interest, not necessarily in the company's best interest, particularly in the environment that we're in, where there are a lot of, you know, guys out there that buy stock and fire CEOs on a regular basis. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with the for-profit. It's more the way Wall Street works. I think if you have, to April's point the best, like if you have a leader that has a long-range outlook and is student-centered, that it can work. I find it very hard in California, where we're 49th in per pupil funding, to imagine that you could make it work, because it's a tough place to operate. But I don't think for-profit, not-profit is, you know, black, white, evil, you know, good, evil.
Well, so the profit motive clearly does keep a lot of for-profit companies out of California, right? Because the per pupil is so low. But at the same time, John, you should talk a little bit about what happened in the early days when a lot of Wall Street people and investors decided, yeah, this was not a profitable business for them to get involved. So how did it work? Because you really, many of you at the K-12 management level, right, didn't get tons of outside investors.
Yeah, she's right on target. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. It may not be politically correct, but it's true. And the truth is that this organization I founded probably would not be where it is today if it wasn't based on a very long-term vision of producing high-performing schools, regardless of the bottom line. And then once you do that, and they're great schools, it kind of takes care of, the rest of it takes care of itself. And it's worked. And then you reinvest and you grow and you continue to get better. And I think that's where the model is starting to prove itself. Not just us, but there's others that are breaking through. But the early entries, and without names being named, I think there was a lot of failures because it was driven by a short-term Wall Street-driven model that did not kind of take into consideration that these are, at the end of the day, public schools. These are not widgets, these are children, and these are families. And you've got to earn the trust of those families, and they will see through. I don't care how savvy you are, if you're there as a salesperson versus as a caring educator or operator of a school. And so I think it really goes back to putting the priorities straight, building a model that's high-performing, that's student-centered, uses technology to enhance that, drive it, all the things that we all probably use in very identical ways and continue to trial and research and develop. But then add it to, I think, the efficiencies of a scale model that can start to do that at 60 schools, 100 schools, 200 schools. That's the new world. That's the new 2.0 of this. That's where the KIPs are going. That's where we're going. That's where others are going, which is we're going to break through in this new model where a lot of folks have been sitting at 40 or 50 schools for a long time, kind of, doing a good job or even a great job in many cases, but does that really matter when they're 0.0004% of the marketplace? And I told my team that recently. We thought we were all big because we were hitting 40,000 kids, and I said that's 0.0004% of the marketplace. So don't think you're all that yet. You've got a long way to go.
So where are we going in the future? Are you going to have, all KIPs are going to be technology, innovation central? Are there going to be most kids on a daily basis are engaged half-time with teachers, half-time with their technology? I mean, give me a picture of what you think the future, both for KIP and then your environment that you're in. You're in Chicago, you're seeing what else is happening. You're talking to educators, you're a consumer of education knowledge now. What should we know?
I definitely think, within the KIP network, we're starting to see more adoption of integrating technology into our models. We started off a couple of years ago with someone, he's in the room, Anirban, who was our director of instructional technology. He's now going to work full-time for the KIP Foundation to then do more research on what's happening in this landscape and sharing those best practices with other KIP schools. Part of our philosophy in KIP is the power to lead, so I don't think you'll ever find a situation where the foundation is saying every KIP school has to integrate technology in this way, but I do think that most of our leaders are looking at results and looking at what's working in LA and other schools and wanting to adopt those practices because it's working for our kids. So I do think that you're gonna find a lot of KIP leaders wanting to understand how to effectively integrate technology into their models. And I also think, even in Chicago, we're seeing a similar kind of movement where other leaders, are starting to come to KIP to wonder what's happening on our campuses and how can they also integrate those practices into their school. We're actually, our newest campus that's opening up in the fall, we're working on a co-share, a new vision for effective co-share. So this is a charter school with a non-charter school leader, and we're working on a grant right now to share resources with that other school around integrating technology into this high school that's in Chicago. So I think there is more of an appetite for sharing best practices and wanting to share resources as well.
And what would you never do again that you've done? Is there anything out there that you just wouldn't touch, you wouldn't buy, you wouldn't get into that you guys have seen?
And Nirban can probably talk about this in terms of money wasted. I think we have moved more towards Chrome notebooks. I think we've probably wasted some money on some devices that were not necessary. In terms of what we wouldn't do, I think if we knew, back 2 years ago what we know now, we had a lot of pilots at our school. We did have a vision for, this was our existing campus, we had a vision for what we wanted our school to look like, but I think we had 12 pilots going on at the school, so it was probably too many pilots to really understand what was working well. So probably I think that the number of pilots that we had at our school.
What about you, John?
One of the things that we find as a continual challenge is the growth that we're at also demands a lot of high-quality teachers. Finding those teachers coming from the typical teacher colleges they're not really prepared for our model, for the level of commitment that's required, the use of technology in an integrated way, all the things that we require in the model to really drive outcomes that we're getting. And so we're looking at innovations around that, and we think there's people that are thought leaders in that area that could help to make, to help not only get teachers prepared for this new ed reform world in a quicker, faster way, but more of them prepared and, quite frankly, assess them in ways that are more predictive and supportive of where we need them to be in the top quartile from the beginning. So that's a big challenge area as we grow. We hired 1,500 teachers last year alone, so you can imagine having to, kind of get through 20,000 job applications for those 1,500 positions is a challenge. On the technology side, I would say that we would probably not start our own software company if we had to do it all over again. Yeah, that was probably not the... But 12 years ago, there was no one doing what we needed. And so it was just a reality that we had to create it ourselves. So we put 20 guys in a room and paid them through pizza underneath the door and kind of made them, sort of create software, which worked, except when you get to scale and you start to see that the rest of the market has those applications. So we definitely buy a lot of product and services now that we didn't before. And that way we're comparable to a district, except that it doesn't take us a long time to make decisions. And we don't really usually do entire system-wide contracts first year. We like to test model people within a couple schools, different markets, compare and contrast, and start to get the data back that shows why this one works and why that one doesn't, and then move forward with it. So those are some of the pluses and minuses we've learned.
A recurring theme, and you just alluded to it with the human capital challenge that we have, keeps coming up. And there's a lot of companies here that are showing, content and smart boards and different ways for teachers to get their hands quickly on content and assimilate it and aggregate it and use it in the classroom. And are those all kind of Band-Aids or are they doing it because they perceive that we're lacking in grit and ability in our teachers, Marcia and Beth? I'm wondering how you see this problem, which is we still need people, and we have people coming in who lack the knowledge base that it's really going to take to educate not only that additional million on waiting lists, but the big numbers that are all throughout the system.
Well, I think it's a lot easier to build technology than to build people, right? And so it's easier to say, oh, if we put a smartboard in, or if we put this new curriculum in, or if they put the kids on this program, that'll solve the problem. The reality is what, and Mike didn't really touch on this morning, what our secret sauce is, but our secret sauce is leaders, and that's what it takes. You can have a Harriet Ball or a Rafe or, Jaime Escalante in a school, and they're not surrounded by others. What allows a school to be great is a great leader who can then figure out what the human capital looks like to drive that school. So, and I think that gets lost a lot of time in this discussion. There's a lot of talk about teachers, but there's not a lot of talk about, and I see JC down there nodding, about the leaders. When you have an April Goebel run a school, it's an amazing school. And, it's hard to replicate that, but we spend literally millions of dollars at KIPP, developing leaders and continuing to develop them. So I would say that's, first and foremost. And those leaders are the ones that support the teachers. So I think technology can absolutely be a tool. And I think if we're trying to prepare students for the 21st century, and you think about that whole, shift happens video, and what we're trying to prepare kids for, technology is a very important part of what we're doing. But as Mike said, and as we all believe at KIPP, it starts with great teachers and great leaders and great teachers to drive that first and foremost. And I think that a great leader can work with teachers to move them from novice to master.
And Beth, jump in on that conversation and tell us your views, but also how do great leaders deal with the fact that you constantly have really bad actors in the education system that are challenging you and firing at you constantly? How do you keep those leaders if the political environment is constantly negative?
Well, first the easy question, which is the technology question. I think we need technology that's going to help our teachers and leaders be better, as in any other industry. And I think I agree that the best teachers and leaders can get great outcomes no matter what they have, but I think what we need is technology that is going to help teachers be better, that is going to help them differentiate instruction more, and is going to help sort of either close the achievement gap or close our achievement gap with our neighbors outside of the U.S. And I think that's easier said than done. And one of the problems is that in education we do not have a lot of appetite for failure, and we need to change that. So one of the things I always say that in medicine, if something helps 7% of the people who have a certain illness, we hail it as a huge success. If something in education doesn't help 97% of the people, it's a huge failure. And we need to, with technology, change the way we think about that. And we need those of you investing in technology or to help us think through that there's not a one-size-fits-all in education. But in terms of the other piece, I mean, I think some things that we need are, we need, as educators and as ed reformers, and are those of you who are coming into this space to invest, is we need support to change the political landscape so that there is the same support for innovation and reform as there are in other markets. And without that, I will tell you, you will have Chicago all over the country. And I love Chicago, and I'm not going anyplace, but I will tell you, after 25 years in public education, this is the most tiring 2 years I've had in my life. I think it is, and I spend 90% of my time fighting for my schools not to be closed, even though they're outperforming the neighborhood schools. I'm fighting for equitable funding. I'm fighting for the ability, I just got an email that something was just passed in the state legislature not to allow any new, or it got out of committee, not to allow any new distance learning programs in Illinois. I don't even know what that means. So we need help, and those of you who want to invest in that space actually need to help our voices to change the political landscape. And I do not care. I am a staunch independent because we need help on both sides of the aisle.
Well, and what a lot of people in this space don't know, frankly, is people like you, Beth, and John are involved politically all the time because you have to be, right? Because there aren't these built-in enormous groups that already get public money to support lobbyists, et cetera. And so Beth not only has the school leader, network leader, she has to be the political leader also because she's been around a long time and she knows how to advise people. John, you help pay for lobbyists in Florida. You coalesce people together. Jim Shelton said this really well before. He said, you guys have to be experts in education, be real experts, understand how dollars flow. We fight with legislators all the time. No, that's not what happens to dollars. No, that's not what accountability really is happening. I had a guy in the legislature recently told me he didn't know what a cutoff score was. We were talking about tests. I said, they're changing the cutoff score on charters. They're not changing the cutoff score on other schools. He's like, what do you mean there's a cutoff score? Where does that come from? Somebody find out for me. It was like the most amazing experience. So if they don't have strong voices, right? But you might want to tell some of the recent war stories about money and online learning in Florida.
I would actually say if anyone that wants to build a charter network actually makes it to scale, you deserve, like the Nobel Peace Prize or something. Because honestly, I don't think anyone who, unless they've done this, realize how hard it is. And it's not like pat on the back time. It's more about the fact that you are building a car while you're racing it, while you're building the track, all at the same time, and oftentimes with a couple mechanics underneath it fixing something that went wrong. I mean, that's the analogy I always use with our team, because you're out front building that track, which is in fact the policy network. You're doing it with folks that should be on your side, traditional educators, oftentimes throwing rocks at you while you're doing it, because they can't question they can't question the outcomes. They don't question the efficiency because you're getting less money. They might question your motives. That's about the only thing they can try to get after, or maybe you haven't helped 100% of the kids 100% of the time, in spite of the fact that they're failing 90% of the kids 90% of the times, oftentimes in these same markets. So I think that's just politics, and I look at it as an opportunity that if it doesn't kill you, you get stronger model, because we are truly willing and able to go in. And I think Beth hit the nail on the head. When you're sitting in there writing a software program and you're thinking it's going to apply to math third grade and it's going to drive achievement, we need you also to think about the fact that we're in there battling, and we need everybody battling to support more choice around education and more accountability at the same time. They go together, and choice without accountability fails, accountability without choice fails. And when they go together under equitable scenarios, where
But
some kids
define
are...
accountability. You mean a regulation that tells people exactly how to behave?
No.
Or are you talking about outcomes?
Outcomes-based accountability.
Because we know that this movement is also plagued by people who
Right.
want to hold charter schools accountable for the same rules and regulations
Absolutely
they tried
not.
to chase 30 years ago.
Right, and in some ways, you could actually make the case, I think you've made this, Jeannie, on TV and stuff, that charters are starting to become a little bit like their own blob in a certain sense, which I think she registered, trademarked that name many, many years ago, to be, because there is this sense that, we're starting to almost overregulate our own selves. We're part of the process. We've created, have and have-nots within the system. There's a lot of, it's very difficult to get charters in some markets if you don't have 10 years of experience. Well, how do you get the experience if it's kind of like a catch-22. And so there's a lot of issues around that. But at the end of the day, those who scale it, grow it, and continue to drive outcomes just have to keep doing that, and eventually the noise will fall away. I have hope when I see countries like Sweden and Norway looking at outcomes and don't care about the type of the money follows the student, and that it's all about innovation and choice, and the U.S. is behind them on being progressive this way. So I think it's a progressive movement, actually, to allow more flourishment in the space, and to then amplify it. We don't give front page stories enough in this country of the great one-on-one stories in a classroom where a choice model made a difference. We make the front page about the one that makes the mistake, and that's the huge mistake we're making right now.
So I want to ask you all, starting with April, about return on education. Then we probably have a few minutes for questions, but return on education, ROE, also reminds me that there's an award program going on tomorrow night. You guys still have to vote. You got till 5 o'clock today, I think, to put your votes in. Charter Schools USA was nominated, was one of the KIP, was Schools International. Okay, well, there's a bunch of companies, a bunch of categories. You got to go on your app and vote. But ROE, how do you guys measure it? Who's holding what over your head, making sure that your kids are doing well, and what's success?
Well, we have something that's called the Healthy Schools Framework. So we have essential questions that sort of guides each school in their performance. So we definitely look at, all of our schools take NWEA, so we all have a dashboard where we can look across all of the KIPP schools and see how they're performing and look at what's happening in one school and then all the school leaders sort of sharing best practices. So I think the Healthy Schools Framework came out a couple of years ago, and it's really helped provide a common language for all of our schools in terms of what is important and what matters most. So everything from attrition to are we serving students who need us the most? So I think those are the things that matter to us the most. And I think within that, if technology is helping drive student outcomes, then that's also another piece that is important.
That's great. John, ROE?
Our return on education model is truly built on the 50-50 concept that money does matter because it's a value proposition of where you spend it and what return you get on that from an educational point of view. I think it's completely congruent to have a model where the limited funds that we receive are in fact built into not just the data dashboards that are at every single level and all that goes with that we have, but that the overall concept itself is sustainable, that you're capable of taking fire, putting on lobbyists where you need to, taking the issues that come with this business where, numbers might be down in a given state and for a couple years and then up in another state or whatnot, to have the diversified, true portfolio effect that any large-scale organization has so that you can weather those storms, be stronger for them, and then continue to drive your goal. So our ultimate ROE is things such as, we just saw, I think, these numbers will come out soon. We took over the lowest performing schools in Indianapolis for the state of Indiana. Those schools had an aggregate of somewhere around 45% graduation rates last year. We're expecting those rates to be somewhere around 90% this year. So in 1 year, driving a graduation rate in the lowest performing schools up by 100% is something that we consider ultimately to be the measure by which, and then a 94% college placement level from there. So,
Beth? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go to Beth because we've done KIPP a little bit.
For us, we have actually a contract with each of our SMO providers that has a 10-point rubric that's based on value-added growth, which is about 60%, parent satisfaction level, which we haven't talked about here, but is very important. We talk about how we're doing in comparison to demographically similar schools, which is sort of the bar at our ankles, but it's important for the politics of this. And then we also look at retention level because our greatest measure of whether or not parents think that we are a value add and a good choice is what percentage of our students stay. So John, when we meet at the end of the year, we will look at that 10-point rubric for the 4 schools that he runs for CICS, and what that looks like will determine, I'm sure we'll have a long-term relationship, but that's what we use as a metric to say what's working and what do we need to change.
Does anybody have questions out there while we finish up in the next few minutes? If you do, raise your hand, because I'm just going to keep going for a few minutes. Oh, okay. And I'll repeat it. Thank you. Trish McCarty from Star Schools here in Phoenix is asking, what can we do to elevate teachers? Teachers are so not elevated in this movement, in the profession. What can we do as a movement to kind of elevate
I'll
them?
take a shot.
And
Go ahead,
yeah.
please.
I think one thing that the KIP, Marcia sort of mentioned this a little bit, but that the KIP network is trying to do is to really provide a strong pathway for all of our teachers to develop strong leadership skills. So that's everything from, we have an institute that happens in the summer that's developing all of our leaders. So we spend a lot of resources on leadership development, and we think that that is really important for our teachers to make them feel like this is a profession that they can stay in for a very long period of time. And I want to go back to the ROE question, because I left out the most important thing that would be, I would be embarrassed if I walked out of here and didn't talk about that, and that is our commitment to making sure we follow our kids to and through college. So we track when they leave us in 8th grade, and we make sure that we measure that, and that's ultimately the most important measurement for us. So
Right.
I left that out.
No, that's great. John, elevating teachers?
Yeah, I would say part of it is that teachers, because of it being historically, the place where you went when you didn't do business or something else, right? Coming from teachers, being married to one, being a part of a teacher group, not being a teacher myself, but finding that there's never been the kind of opportunity and accountability that comes with the profession that they want and seek. So I think they're the first ones to sort of sometimes, not always, but push back when it looks like accountability without opportunity, if it's heavy-weighted, if it's top-down, if it's not driven from sort of their perspective of what is fair, so to speak. On the other hand, when there's opportunity through professional development and lots of it, and you're growing, and you need teachers to become deans and to become assistant principals and regional leaders and curriculum experts and all that goes with it, they become excited about the dynamics of an organization like that. And so there has to be ways for us to drive that throughout the entire reform movement, where we cross-pollinize and share talent in a way. We haven't done that yet. I think there's new opportunities that haven't even come to someone's mind yet about ways that great teachers could be shared within the ed reform community, so that when they move and they don't happen to be able to be in our network any longer, they could come in your network and then go to someone else's network and do that. So there's a lot of ways to start driving opportunities for teachers so that they look just like, other accountants or people and lawyers,
Well, let's hope not,
and have
but
the same opportunities.
let's hope not
Right.
accountants.
And maybe not accountants or
And
lawyers.
I actually think this is a place where the technology sector can really help, because I think the ability for teachers, for those of you who haven't taught, it's a little bit of a lonely existence. And even though it's, you're in this room, you've got the kid yourself, and even though you have people coming in and out a lot more than you did when I started teaching, it's still it can be very isolating. And I think that the platforms that are out there, everything from better lessons to platforms that allow teachers to share their successes and their professionalism across schools with other people who really appreciate it, is a very powerful technology. And I think there are also some teachers who are starting to advocate on their own. There's a new group called E for E, and I'm not sure what it stands for.
Educators for Excellence.
Yeah, that was started by teachers, and you may or may not agree with everything in their platform, but what I love about it is this is teachers taking responsibility for their own professionalism, and they've grown exponentially in the last 18 months. So I think we're starting to see a change, and I think the fact that educators can now be on platforms where they can share best practices in a way that other technologies and other groups do is really going to change that over the next decade.
And I'd add two other quick things. One is the tools and toys that you can give teachers. It makes a huge difference. Every other profession you walk in, you get your cell phone, you get your iPad, you got a nice computer, you got a place to go. It makes a big difference because they can connect with you, they have access. But the other thing that I'm seeing now a little bit more, but it's not nearly as plentiful in the charter market as it is in a lot of places, frankly, is teachers having the ability to communicate cross schools, cross networks. When I go to events, when we've hosted events, and you get teachers from a whole bunch of different schools in one room, it is awesome. But they don't have that because you're all so busy doing the work you have to do that you don't think about the fact that maybe KIP needs to go over to Charter Schools USA and they have to jump over to Star Schools and they have to get involved. They'd feel a lot bigger and better if they saw it wasn't also kind of just them. We have one more question over here, and I think that's all we have time for. We've got a microphone for you. Hang on 2 seconds. Thank you.
Given all the challenges that have been mentioned here, and given the importance of scale to get more resources and power, do you see the charter schools merging?
I
Merging
think there
into
will
the
be.
system?
Yeah, I think not within the system, no. I think there will be mergers and acquisitions like in any other space over time. But it's fun, Yeah, I think nonprofit and for-profit, but I also don't think that, I think a lot of people think that we're in the 7th inning when we're really only in the 2nd inning of this movement. And we've got a long way to go, because you really don't have that many organizations of scale at this point in the country. I mean, you literally can count them on one hand. And I mean having, more than 30 schools, 25 schools, some kind of number like that. I mean, and so, yes, there will be purchases. There's, people for sale right now, quite frankly, but there's not voluntary coalitions. I think that's happening too already, but I don't think it's happening at the scale it probably could and would. It's still a very fragmented space. I mean, 70% of the charter schools are mom and pop charter schools in this country, and their average size is like 200 students. And so I think part of it is it's hard for them to find efficiencies without getting together under some cooperative or something like that.
Yeah, I think, if you just look at a normal business cycle, at some point we'll have a shakeout, and that'll involve closures and consolidation. I mean, that's just the way it works, but I would agree, we're very early on. I do think when you go, we've seen closures in Los Angeles because of, some of the financial difficulties of operating in the market, and I think as the bar gets raised, right, there's a lot more at stake, we'll probably see schools close or merge as a way to stay alive. I think it's inevitable.
Closing arguments, thoughts, things you want to share? What should people do, react to?
I would just, really see this space as something that may not be as sexy and as cool as the newest app, but it's actually the space that's going to make whether those new apps work or not, because the innovation has the best chance of the seed growing, so to speak, in fertile ground, and this is the fertile ground space. And you don't have to put charter before it, it just has to be schools, and it can be any label you want to put, but at the end of the day, these private-public partnerships, these models of reform, I think are really truly in their first part of the 2nd inning and have a true long-term opportunity in this country to change education. So thank you for being a part of it today, being here.
I think one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is this is my 3rd time at this conference, and it's exciting now to see more educators here and to see there being more of a bridge between both communities. So I think the more educators are involved in the product design side of all of this, I think that will move a little bit faster. So I guess I encourage folks to engage more with educators.
Great point. Marcia?
I would say, when we think about this, the journey we've been on with bringing computer-assisted learning into our schools, the more that it can be, plug and play and integrated and having actually programs speak to each other, the easier and better off we'll be. The biggest challenge that we face is having easy-to-access data, and we've spent, for us, a lot of money on it, and we've kind of just given up because it's not an easy process, and we don't have, unlimited funds. So I think for us, really trying to solve the data issue is critical.
And for me, I think I'm excited, this is my first time at this conference, to see both the investors and the sort of inventors in this space. But what I would say to you is that none of us are going to be successful, and again, charter school, traditional school, unless you also get into the political game, and that you help to push for increased R&D in education by the government, but you also push for the fact that in order for innovation to occur in this sector, the way it has in other sectors, that we need there to be reform-minded or innovation-minded in the traditional schools as well. And I don't think, again, I started my comments with the sense of urgency that I know all of us feel here for a lot of the students in this country and their need for higher quality education immediately, and we're not going to get there because the reality is that our elected officials care more about what you say than what we say. And I don't really care who says it as long as it's said. So I really ask you to use your voice as inventors, as investors, as technology people with your elected officials about the importance of laws that allow you to help really reinvent this space for kids.
And that's a great segue to a final comment that I'll make, and thank you all for being here and being part of it, and you guys have been terrific. And that is that to remember that most of the new technologies currently that are being deployed, that you are marketing to traditional school districts would not be possible had these folks not challenged the education system to kind of wake up. And so that doesn't necessarily, people don't see it that way. It's like, oh, all of a sudden everyone's gone online, everyone's doing digital learning. Well, it all happened in this market first. So if you don't preserve the market, that's a challenge to the system's never going to have a reason to buy and engage in new innovations that actually end up making you more money in the long run, but maybe not for so long. So thanks again. Appreciate you all coming.